All right, welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive.
Always ready to dive in. What are we looking at today?
Well, we're taking a look at C#.net.
Okay, C sharp.
And it's going to be interesting because the source that we're looking at is, honestly, it's a pretty basic definition. You could find this pasted anywhere.
Right, just a quick overview.
Yeah, like the first line of a Wikipedia article or something like that.
Yeah.
But I think that that's what's going to make this interesting, because we're going to really, really take a look and see what we can glean from this seemingly simple definition. So whether you're like cramming for a meeting or something like that, or you're a programmer who's thinking about learning C#, or if you're just curious about the tech world, stick around. This is going to be a fun one.
Absolutely. I think it's amazing how these little snippets of information can actually reveal so much
Yeah.
about a technology.
Yeah. And I think this one's a really good example of that. So, um, right off the bat, one thing that jumps out at me is it says that C# is a programming language, which we probably could have guessed, right?
Right.
But it says it's designed for Microsoft's .NET platforms.
Right.
So I'm just going to assume that means that it's meant to be used for Windows,
Yeah.
right? For applications that run in Windows.
Yeah, that's a common misconception. Initially C sharp was very closely tied to Windows development.
Right.
That's how it kind of started. But the beauty of .NET is that it's actually evolved over time.
Okay.
And now it's become a lot more cross-platform. So while you can certainly use it to build Windows applications, you can also use it to build applications that run on Linux
Oh,
and Mac operating systems as well.
interesting. So it's not just
Yeah.
limited to.
It's broader than that now.
Okay, got it. So
Yeah.
it has a bigger reach than
It does, yeah.
just Windows. So that actually ties in really well with some other parts of this definition that we'll get to in a little bit, like the fact that it's portable and platform independent.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's a really powerful feature for developers
Right.
because it allows them to reach a much wider audience without having to essentially rewrite their code
Right.
for
Yeah.
different operating systems. So that's a huge advantage.
Gotcha. Okay. And then another thing that this definition says is it calls C# the most powerful language in the .NET framework.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've heard that before, and I kind of, whenever I hear something called, you know, the most of anything, it kind of throws up a red flag for me. Is that just marketing? Like, is there any truth to that statement?
Yeah, it's definitely a bold claim, no question about it, but I do think there's some merit to it. You see, C sharp kind of draws inspiration from several different languages like C++, Playzem, VB, .NET, Java. It takes sort of the best features from these different languages and incorporates them into its own design, but then it goes a step further. And this is where I think some of the power comes in. It has some additional features that are quite unique to C sharp.
Oh.
For instance, one of the things that I think really makes it powerful is a feature called LINQ, which stands for Language Integrated Query. And that allows developers to interact with data in a much more streamlined and efficient manner.
Gotcha. So not just borrowing, but also
Exactly.
Okay.
It innovates on top of that
Gotcha.
and adds its own unique capabilities.
Very cool. So another thing that this definition says is that it's a completely object-oriented programming language.
Mm.
And I know that's kind of, for some people, that's a little bit of jargon. So I was hoping maybe you could unpack that a little bit. Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah, sure. So think of it like this. Imagine you're building something complex, like, let's say, a Lego structure.
Yeah.
In object-oriented programming, each Lego block is kind of like an object. It's a self-contained unit with its own properties, its own data.
Yeah.
And it also has certain actions, or what we call methods, that it can perform. So for example, if you were building, let's say, a car in C sharp,
Okay.
you might have objects for the engine, for the wheels, for the steering wheel. And each of these objects would have its own specific characteristics and behaviors.
Okay. So it's like, so object-oriented means that it's sort of like a blueprint for building things in a very structured, logical way.
Exactly. And it actually brings a lot of advantages too, because it makes the code much more modular, reusable, and easier to maintain, which is really important as your projects get larger and more complex.
Yeah. I mean, if you're building a Lego car, that's one thing. But if you're building, like a huge, complex application,
Absolutely.
you need to have a way to organize everything and
Just
keep
a
them.
manageable.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move on. So we've talked a little bit about the .NET framework, object-oriented programming. Now, I want to kind of get into some of the key, I guess, adjectives or descriptions of C Sharp. So the first one that kind of jumps out at me is it says it's simple.
Okay.
Now, I kind of feel like simplicity is relative. What's simple for one person might be difficult for another.
Sure.
Um, but
Yeah.
but in general, would you say that C Sharp is considered a simple programming language?
I would say, yeah, compared to some of the more complex languages out there, like let's say C++, C Sharp does have a reputation for being relatively easy to learn and use.
Okay.
The syntax is generally considered quite clear and intuitive, and I think one of the things that really helps with simplicity is the .NET framework itself. It provides a wealth of pre-built libraries and tools that kind of simplify a lot of common tasks, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time.
Gotcha.
So that definitely helps with the learning curve.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, if you're if you're coming from, let's say, a very simple language,
Hmm.
like maybe, back in the day people used to learn BASIC or something like that.
Right, right,
That's a very simple language.
right.
So if you're coming from something like that, then maybe C Sharp would seem more complicated. But if you're coming from like, C++ or
Yeah.
assembly language,
Sure,
you know,
sure.
something,
You'd be very grateful for.
right, exactly. It would seem much more approachable.
For the simplicity. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So another one that I see here is it says it's secure. And, obviously security is a huge, huge deal these days, especially when we're talking about applications that handle, sensitive information,
Absolutely.
like, financial data or personal information. So, so how does C Sharp address that? Like, what makes it secure?
Well, security is baked into the design of C Sharp from the ground up.
Okay.
For example, it has features like type safety, which helps prevent errors that can arise from mixing incompatible data types. And it also has automatic memory management, which helps prevent vulnerabilities like buffer overflows and memory leaks,
Okay.
which are unfortunately common attack vectors for hackers.
Right.
So by having these features built in, it kind of provides a very solid foundation for building secure applications.
Okay. So it's not like they're adding security as an afterthought.
It's no, it's a core
It's a
principle
part of the core.
of the language itself. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. And then next it says that it's robust. So what does that mean? Does that mean it's like, you can't crash a C Sharp application?
Well, I wouldn't say it's impossible to crash any software,
Right. Right.
but C Sharp does encourage good programming practices like error handling, for example.
Okay.
So it provides mechanisms to catch and manage exceptions so that rather than your application just completely
Well, it's the
crashing.
blue screen of death.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It can actually handle these unexpected situations in a more graceful way.
Right.
And the goal is to basically create applications that are more resilient and can handle, unexpected events.
So it's not that it never goes wrong. It's that when it does go wrong, it doesn't
Yeah, it's more about how you recover
completely
from those issues. Yeah.
explode.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So the next couple here that kind of go together, it says it's portable and platform independent. And we touched on this a little bit earlier when we were talking about, the fact that you can run it on Windows, you can run it on Mac,
Exactly.
you can run it on Linux. So how does it achieve that? Like what is it about C Sharp that allows it to run on all these different platforms?
Yeah. So the key here is the .NET framework itself. It's designed to be cross-platform.
Okay.
So when you compile a C# program, what happens is it's converted into an intermediate language. And this intermediate language can then be executed on any platform that has a .NET runtime environment. So essentially, your application can run on, desktops, servers, mobile phones, potentially all sorts of devices,
Regardless.
regardless of what operating system they're using.
Gotcha. Okay, so the next one, architecturally neutral. This one sounds a little bit
Technical.
technical. So can you break this down for us? Like what does that mean and why is it important?
Sure. So architecturally neutral essentially means that your C# cloud isn't tied to a specific hardware architecture.
Yeah.
So you don't have to worry about whether it's running on, an Intel processor or an AMD processor or
Right.
whatever the underlying architecture is. Your code should, in theory, work regardless.
So it's giving you that flexibility to run on different
Exactly.
types of hardware.
And that's really important these days because we have so many different devices
Yeah.
with different architectures.
Exactly. Okay. The next one here is multi-threaded.
Right.
So can you give us like a real world example of of how this feature is used and why it's important?
Yeah, sure. So imagine you're developing a web browser.
Okay.
With multi-threading, you can have one thread that's handling the user interface.
Okay.
So that's what you see and interact with.
Right.
You could have another thread that's fetching data from the internet in the background,
Okay.
and maybe you have another thread that's rendering the web pages that you're visiting. So by having these different threads running concurrently, you can create a much more smoother and more responsive user experience.
Yeah, it's like having
Pretty
multiple
much.
chefs in a kitchen.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, all working on different parts of the meal
Exactly. So things get
at
done
the same time.
much faster.
Okay. So the next one, automatic memory management. Again, this sounds like a pretty useful feature.
It is. Yeah.
So tell us about that. Like, how does that work, and why is it such a big deal for programmers?
Okay, so in a lot of programming languages, developers have to manually allocate and deallocate memory for their programs. And this can be a very tedious process. It's also very prone to errors
Okay.
because if you're not careful, you can end up with what are called memory leaks, where you're essentially wasting memory that's not being used.
Okay.
But C# takes care of all of this automatically through a feature called garbage collection. So the system basically monitors the memory that's being used. It identifies any memory that's no longer needed, and then it reclaims it.
Okay.
And this really frees up developers to focus on the logic of their applications. They don't have to worry about these low-level memory management details, which is a huge
Yes.
advantage.
It's like having a built-in cleaning crew
Exactly.
that just takes care of all the trash for you.
Keeps everything tidy and efficient. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so last but not least, we have two more that kind of go together here: strong type and exception handling. And again, these might sound a little bit technical, but maybe you can shed some light on how those contribute to the overall reliability of C# applications.
Sure. So strong typing basically means that the language enforces strict rules on how you use data.
Okay,
So it helps prevent errors that can arise from mixing incompatible data types.
like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
Exactly. It prevents those kinds of mismatches.
Gotcha.
So that leads to fewer bugs and more predictable behavior, which is really important.
Okay.
Exception handling, on the other hand, provides mechanisms to deal with unexpected errors in a more graceful way.
Okay.
So, for example, if your application tries to access a file that doesn't exist, instead of just crashing, it can catch this exception and
Right.
maybe display a user-friendly error message or try to recover from that situation in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, strong typing is kind of like you know preventing those errors from happening in the first place,
Right, it's like a preventative measure.
and then exception handling is kind of like the backup plan.
Exactly. Yeah. If something does go wrong, how do you handle it gracefully?
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So that was a lot of information to unpack there, and I think we've pretty much covered all the key points of this definition.
We have, yeah.
Oh, actually, there's one little part of this definition that I kind of glossed over, but I wanted to mention it because it's kind of funny. At the end, it says, "Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel,"
Yeah. Yeah, that's
which is, I mean, it's not really part of that definition of C#, but it's
it's a reminder that even in the world of code and technology,
Oh, it's-
personal branding
big is important.
and audience engagement
Yeah,
are still relevant.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so just to kind of wrap things up, we started with this very simple, seemingly simple definition,
Mhm.
and we were able to really kind of unpack a lot of information about C#.net.
We did.
So, just to recap, we talked about the fact that it's a versatile language. You can use it for lots of different applications, from desktop programs to web services.
Mhm.
It's object-oriented, which is really important for building complex applications.
Absolutely.
We talked about how it's uh, secure, robust, portable, platform independent. All these things that really make it a powerful language for developers to use.
And I think what's really interesting is how C# has evolved over time to kind of mirror what's happening in the broader software development landscape.
Right.
So, the emphasis on cross-platform compatibility, on cloud computing, these are all things that really reflect the changing needs of
Mhm.
developers and users alike.
Yeah. So given all of this, and given all these great features of C#, like what kind of applications can you imagine someone building with it?
Oh, the possibilities are really endless. I mean, you could build anything from a simple mobile game to a sophisticated e-commerce platform to even a machine learning application
Wow.
that analyzes data and makes predictions. C Sharp's really used across a wide range of industries.
So I guess the takeaway here is if you're a programmer and you're looking for a language to learn, C# is definitely one to consider.
I would agree. I would definitely recommend it.
And for our listeners who aren't programmers, um, I think it's still interesting to kind of peek behind the curtain and see, what goes into building the software that we use every day,
It is. Yeah.
and to kind of appreciate the complexity and the power of these programming languages.
Uh,
All right, so that's it for our deep dive on C#.net. I hope you found this informative and maybe even a little bit inspiring.
hmm
And who knows, maybe you'll be building the next killer app using C#.
I hope so. That would be exciting.
Yeah, that would be awesome. All right, well, until next time, happy coding.
Happy coding.